It started with an email, a simple, seemingly innocent subject line, "Exclusive invitation, a unique opportunity awaits you." It looked like spam, the kind of junk that fills up your inbox when you've been on the internet too long. But something about it caught my eye. Maybe it was the lack of a company name or the subtle urgency in the body of the message that seemed to whisper, "You're meant to see this." I've always been someone who's easily intrigued, often far too curious for my own good. That email was the start of everything. I remember sitting in front of my computer late at night, my apartment filled with the comforting hum of silence. I'd just returned from an exhausting day at work, having buried my mind in the monotony of spreadsheets and presentations. But this email was different. It didn't feel like the usual scam. It felt real. "Welcome to the world of the elite." It went on to explain that what I was about to see would change the way I viewed the internet forever. There was no promise of riches or fame, but it assured me I'd find something interesting. A dark part of me was drawn to it, and before I knew it, I clicked the link. The screen blinked as it loaded, and the page that appeared was unlike anything I had ever seen. The design was sleek but eerie, dark backgrounds with flashing neon letters. It looked like a mix between a futuristic marketplace and a horror movie set. The page read, "The missing person auction. Only the brave need apply." I was both repelled and fascinated. The page was simple, offering a list of items that could be bought. I nearly closed the browser in disgust when I saw the first entry. Subject number 1, Claire Dawson, missing for 2 weeks, age 29. A grainy photo appeared beside the description, a woman with short, brown hair and wide, terrified eyes. There was no other information, just the chillingly brief statement, bidding starting at $50,000. My heart raced. What was this? A cruel joke? Some sick fantasy auctioning off missing people? But as I scrolled down, more names appeared, more faces. Subject number 2, Brandon Harper, last seen 10 days ago, age 34. The photo was of a man in a business suit, smiling in what appeared to be a casual office photo. He looked ordinary, unassuming. The starting bid, $25,000. Each entry on the page seemed more disturbing than the last. Some of the descriptions mentioned how long the person had been missing. Others included chilling notes about their last known whereabouts or the circumstances of their disappearance. There were no clear explanations, just cryptic details that made me shiver. I couldn't stop scrolling. The site had dozens of these open auctions. Every person listed had a price attached. It felt like I was looking at a twisted version of an old classifieds page. But instead of selling cars or furniture, it was selling human beings, real people, whose faces I would never forget. I wanted to close the page. The whole thing felt like a sick joke, yet I felt an overwhelming compulsion to keep looking. I clicked on a link titled "More Info" for one of the listings. Subject number 7, Elizabeth Rhodes. The screen went black for a moment, and then a grainy video appeared. It showed a woman sitting on a cold concrete floor, her eyes red from crying, her hands bound behind her back. The video was short, only a few seconds, but the terror in her eyes was unmistakable. I could feel my pulse quicken as I watched her face twitch with fear. She looked directly into the camera, as if pleading for someone to rescue her. The video ended abruptly and the page loaded again, bringing me back to the auction list. I sat there frozen in my chair. What was I looking at? How could something like this exist? A deep sense of dread settled over me, but it was soon replaced with an almost involuntary curiosity. I felt like I had stumbled upon something that no one was meant to see, something that was far worse than I could ever imagine. As I stared at the list, a new notification popped up on my screen. "Congratulations, you have unlocked your personal account. Place your bid now." I didn't remember creating an account. I hadn't even entered any personal information. My heart skipped a beat. The email, the invitation, it was all leading to this moment. A part of me wanted to shut the computer off, to run and pretend none of this had ever happened. But something deeper inside me, something I wasn't entirely proud of, urged me to stay. It whispered in my ear that I needed to see this through, to understand what this was all about. But just as I hovered my cursor over the screen, another notification appeared. "You're being watched." It wasn't a message from the site. No, it was a pop-up, but the message seemed to come from nowhere. My blood ran cold. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands trembling. I felt like something, was watching me from the other side of the screen. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of the auction. The faces of the missing people haunted me. I couldn't shake the image of Elizabeth Rhodes' terrified expression, locked in that dimly lit room, begging for someone to save her. My mind kept returning to the same question: who was behind this? The thought that I had been invited to this dark corner of the web was enough to make my skin crawl. I had heard rumors about the dark web, about how dangerous and unpredictable it was, but I had always dismissed them as exaggerated tales. Now I was forced to face the fact that some of those rumors were all too real. The next morning I sat at my desk at work, unable to concentrate. The images from the auction kept replaying in my mind, and I knew one thing for certain: I had to find out more. But I also knew that doing so would open doors I might not be able to close. Still, the curiosity that had consumed me last night was still there, gnawing at the back of my mind. I had to know who was behind this, and more importantly, how they had my name. I didn't realize it then, but clicking that link, responding to that email, and diving into the depths of the dark web had set something in motion. A chain of events that would lead me down a path I could never turn back from. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what would come next. But deep inside, I knew one thing. I was in this now, and there was no going back. After that sleepless night, I found myself drawn back to the auction site again and again. My mind told me to stop, but my fingers couldn't resist the temptation to click. Each time I returned, more faces appeared on the screen, more stories of the missing, more victims. The sheer volume of them was staggering. People I'd never known, people who had vanished from the world, now available for auction. But what was worse was the creeping sensation that something was watching me, waiting for me to act. I told myself I wouldn't bid. I'd just look, just observe. But then I found something that made my heart stop. The listing was for a man named Daniel Grayson. I clicked on the link for more information, and a video loaded. Unlike the others, this wasn't a grainy, low-resolution video. This one was crystal clear. Daniel was sitting in a dark, cold room, his face bruised, his hands shaking as he clutched a slip of paper. His eyes were wide, terror written on his face. He looked directly into the camera, as if speaking to me specifically. "Help me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. They know everything about you. They know you're watching." I froze. I could feel a cold sweat dripping down my back, my stomach churning. I'd seen videos like this before, but something about Daniel's words sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a warning. The page updated with a new note beneath the video. Starting bid, $100,000. I wanted to look away. I knew I had to stop, but instead I couldn't pull my eyes from the screen. There was something about it, something that didn't make sense. Why would a stranger, someone who had never heard of me, say those words? They know everything about you. The words repeated in my mind like an echo growing louder. That night, after I finally shut my laptop, I tried to push it all out of my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just an elaborate prank, that the video was staged. But the more I thought about it, the more the feeling grew that it wasn't. The next day, something changed. I received another email. This one wasn't from the same anonymous source. No, this one had a name attached to it, Daniel Grayson. The subject line read, "I need you to help me." I opened it, trembling. The message was short but direct. "You've seen the auction. You know what they're doing. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. They'll come for you next. I can help you, but you have to act fast. Don't make the same mistake I did." I clicked on the link in the email. My heart was racing. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I certainly didn't expect to be redirected to a live video stream. The camera was shaky, the room dark, but I could make out a figure sitting in a chair, bound at the wrists. The video cut in and out, the audio garbled with static, but there was one thing I could see clearly. Daniel's eyes. They were wide with fear, staring directly into the camera. "I'm not the only one," he said through the static. "They have more of us. They'll get to you soon if you don't stop." I closed the tab, my hands trembling, my breathing shallow. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I didn't know what was happening, but everything was becoming more real. The email, the video, the warning. They knew about me. I tried to ignore it. I really did. For days, I convinced myself that it was just an elaborate scam, that someone was playing an extremely cruel prank. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there was someone out there who knew exactly what I was doing. That feeling followed me everywhere, seeping into every corner of my life. I found myself checking my locks at night, staring out the window, waiting for something to happen. It wasn't until the third day that I received a phone call that made my blood run cold. The number was unlisted. I didn't recognize it, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end was low, distorted. "You're still looking," the voice said. "Still curious, still searching. You don't know what you're getting into." I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. Then I heard it, a faint sound, like scratching at the door. I walked toward it, heart hammering in my chest. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate. I reached for the handle, my breath held in my throat. But when I opened the door, no one was there. My pulse was racing, my mind spinning. I rushed to the window and looked out. Nothing. I felt a deep, gnawing fear settle in my stomach. Whoever or whatever was behind this, they weren't going to stop. The warnings were real. The more I tried to ignore it, the closer I felt to being consumed by it. That night, I made a decision. I had to find out who was behind the auction. I had to end it before they came for me. I couldn't stop myself. The curiosity was too powerful, too overwhelming. If I didn't act, I'd be next. So I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do. I logged back onto the dark web. I navigated through the familiar, sinister pages until I arrived back at the auction site. My heart thudded as I scrolled through the listings, each more horrific than the last. But this time, something was different. There was a new listing at the top. Subject number 8, you. The message beneath the photo was simple and direct. The auction starts now. You are the final piece. I froze. My fingers hovered over the screen, and my blood ran cold. It was my face, my picture, and just beneath it, in bold red letters, price, $1. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe, as a cold, sickening realization gripped me. They knew who I was. They knew everything. And now I was their next auction. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. It was my face. There was no doubt about it. The picture was taken in a way that I knew I hadn't taken it myself. It was candid, like someone had snapped it while I was walking down the street, completely unaware. The cold dread in my stomach churned with each passing second. My mind was racing. How had they gotten that picture? Who was behind this? But more importantly, why me? The auction page continued to update in real time, showing a countdown timer. The starting price for me was set at $1. That was all, just a single dollar. But beneath that, I could see the current bids rolling in. It was like the system was alive, constantly refreshing, as if waiting for someone to bite. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of sick joke. But the longer I looked, the more real it became. The fear began to mount. This was no joke. Someone was watching me. Someone was willing to pay for me. And as the time ticked down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone on the other side, watching me, waiting for me to make a move. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, an instinctive desire to close the page fighting against the pull of curiosity. But I didn't close it. I couldn't. This was the only lead I had. I needed to know more. I had to find out who was behind this, why they were targeting me. The auction went live. The first bid came in, a mere $5. Then another, $10, $25. It was escalating quickly. Each bid came in faster, more desperate, as if the bidders knew something I didn't. By the time the auction hit $100,000, my hands were shaking uncontrollably. The timer was ticking down faster now, the bids coming in more frequently. The bidders weren't just trying to win me, they were fighting to own me. And then it happened. The next bid came in, $500,000. I leaned in closer to the screen, my throat dry. I had to know who was behind this. I couldn't just be a commodity for some faceless bidder to take. The thought of it sent a wave of nausea over me. But before I could act, a new message appeared on the screen, directly beneath the bids. You've made the mistake of drawing attention. The message felt like a punch to the gut. My breath caught in my throat. The text continued. You've been marked. Don't try to run. We'll find you no matter where you go. The auction will end soon, and you'll be ours. My heart raced and I could feel a cold sweat forming along my spine. They knew I was watching, and now they were toying with me. But why? Why me? What had I done to deserve this? The timer hit the final minute, and the bids kept climbing. $750,000. $1 million. I was no longer just a commodity. I was a high-priced, highly sought-after object. And the only thing I could do was watch it unfold. But something was off. With just seconds left on the timer, something on the page shifted. The bid count stopped updating. It froze. I refreshed the page, but it didn't change. The final bid remained at $1 million, but now the countdown timer had stopped entirely, no longer ticking down. I stared at the screen, unable to process what was happening. My mind was racing. What was going on? Had someone hacked the auction? Or was this some kind of new phase in the nightmare I was trapped in? And then, in the chat box beneath the auction, a new message appeared. It was from the same anonymous user who had been bidding against me all along. I'll take him. The words were chilling. They weren't referring to an object, they were referring to me. The feeling of being hunted hit me with full force now. The message didn't just mean a transaction was happening. It meant that someone, somewhere, had just bought me. Before I could react, my phone buzzed. A new text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. We've bought you. The price is paid. You're ours now. I stumbled back from my laptop, gasping for breath. The panic I had been suppressing for so long suddenly consumed me. I grabbed my phone and looked at the message, but there was no sender information, only a phone number with no area code. I looked back at the auction page, but the screen was black now, completely empty. The bids, the countdown, everything had disappeared. The page had vanished as if it never existed. I quickly closed my laptop, my hands trembling. I had to think. I needed a plan, but deep down I knew I couldn't escape. Whoever was behind this had already gotten what they wanted, and it was only a matter of time before they came for me. I spent the next few days trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, that maybe, just maybe, it was all a sick prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The message, the bidding war, the strange sense of finality I felt when the auction ended, it all told me something darker was unfolding. I couldn't ignore the gnawing fear that crept into my every thought. I kept thinking about the words from that anonymous message. We've bought you. The price is paid. You're ours now. No matter how much I wanted to dismiss it, I knew my life had changed forever. My thoughts were chaotic, frantic, trying to figure out who these people were, what they wanted, and why they had picked me. But I was no closer to finding answers. The paranoia slowly turned to dread as I began noticing strange things around me. At first it was subtle, nothing too obvious. The feeling of being watched, the glance of a shadow behind me as I walked down the street, an eerie chill that would wash over me in the middle of the day. But over time, it escalated. It started with a knock on my door late one evening. When I opened it, no one was there. Just a black envelope lying on the doorstep. Inside, there was a single, cryptic message. Don't bother running. The hunt begins now. My heart skipped a beat. It felt like a warning, an inescapable reminder that my time was running out. But I couldn't let myself panic. I had to think. If I stayed still, if I kept hiding in fear, they would find me. It was only a matter of time. So I ran. I grabbed my phone, a few essentials, and left my apartment. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get out. The streets were busy, and I tried to blend in with the crowd, but the feeling of being followed never left me. Every turn I made, every alley I passed, every reflection in store windows made me second-guess myself. Was someone behind me? Was it all in my head? Or were they truly closing in on me? I found refuge in a small, dimly lit cafe. I sat in the corner booth, trying to steady my breathing. I was already on edge, but I was determined not to let fear consume me. I needed to figure out my next move. As I scrolled through my phone, I tried to track down any leads. There was nothing. No new messages, no more contact from the dark web auction site. But that didn't mean I was safe. The terror that gripped me now was that I couldn't rely on any traditional means of safety. This was no longer just a game or a threat. This was real. Then, as if the universe was taunting me, my phone buzzed again. It was an email. I opened it, already feeling a pit in my stomach form. The subject line read, "We know where you are." I froze. My eyes scanned the message. It was short, to the point. "We've been tracking you. We've been watching. You're not safe. You will be found. The hunt is on." I swallowed hard, my hands shaking as I read it again. How did they know where I was? I hadn't even entered my location into any of my apps. But it didn't matter. They had eyes everywhere. I looked up from my phone, but everything in the cafe felt like a blur. People were talking, sipping their drinks, going about their day. But all I could focus on was the creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. The walls felt too close, the shadows too deep. My gaze darted around the room, trying to make sense of it all. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart raced. Suddenly, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A man sitting at the counter, his back to me. He seemed out of place, too calm, too still in the midst of all the chaos. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a baseball cap, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, waiting for something. His hands gripped a cup of coffee, but his eyes never left me. My pulse quickened. I didn't know if it was him, if he was part of it, but I didn't have time to figure it out. The message had made it clear. They were tracking me, and they were getting closer. I stood up quickly, my chair scraping against the floor, as I hurriedly shoved my phone into my bag. I needed to get out of there before whatever was about to happen did. But as I turned toward the door, my breath caught in my throat. The man was gone. Just like that. As if he had never been there. The seat was empty. I ran out of the cafe without looking back, my heart racing. This was no longer just about an auction. This was about something far worse. The hunt had started, and there was no escape. I didn't know how much longer I could keep running. The feeling of being hunted had escalated to a terrifying reality. I couldn't trust anyone. Not the strangers on the street, not the people who smiled at me. Every interaction, every glance made me think they were part of the twisted game. I spent the next few days trying to stay one step ahead. I moved from one location to another, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. But with every new place I went, the eerie sense of being watched only grew stronger. The cryptic messages kept coming, each one more chilling than the last. I felt like I was being suffocated by the weight of it all. Then on the fifth night, it happened. I was at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. It was a far cry from the comfort I had once known, but it offered anonymity, and for now that was all I cared about. I locked the door and pulled the blinds shut, trying to create a semblance of safety. The room was small with peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights. It felt like a place where time stood still, and I was trapped in its suffocating grip. I sat on the bed, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. I hadn't dared to check the dark web again, too scared of what I might find. But now I felt a strange compulsion to do so. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I opened the browser, the screen flickering slightly as the familiar dark web page loaded. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I wasn't prepared for what appeared next. "Welcome to the final round." The message was clear. This was it. The auction wasn't over. It had only just begun. Before I could close the page, another message popped up, this one more personal than the others. "You think you can escape? You think you can hide? You belong to us now. You are the prize, and the game is far from over." Panic surged through me. The room seemed to close in. the walls tightening around me like a vice. I couldn't breathe. The dread that had been growing inside me for days now felt suffocating, overwhelming. I was paralyzed. I had no escape. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the door broke through my paralysis. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, terrified. The knock was repeated, louder this time, as if whoever was on the other side was growing impatient. I didn't know who it was, didn't know if I even wanted to find out. But then I heard a voice, software calm. "It's time. Open the door." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was screaming at me to run, but I was frozen in place. The knock came again, this time followed by a sound I'll never forget. The soft scraping of metal against the door. It was then that I realized they weren't going to wait for me to make a move. The game had already been set in motion, and I was just a player. My heart pounded as I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I couldn't stay here. I had to move. I had to do something. I grabbed my things, my bag, and dashed for the window. Without thinking, I threw open the blinds and climbed out into the cold night. My feet hit the ground with a thud and I stumbled forward, disoriented. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The streetlights above blurred as I passed, their yellow glow casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me, as if trying to pull me back. The cold air stung my skin, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. As I turned a corner, my phone buzzed again. I hesitated, but then checked the screen, my heart sinking. "You can run, but you can't hide. You're ours now." The message felt like a weight in my chest. I wasn't just being hunted, I was being toyed with. But by who? Who were these people, and why had they chosen me? Was I just another prize in their sick game? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind me cut through the silence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I dared not look back. I knew they were close. They were closer than I realized. I turned another corner, nearly colliding with a parked car. The footsteps were louder now, echoing in the dark alley, and I knew I couldn't outrun them. My mind raced for any escape, any chance to break free. I reached a dead end, a narrow alley with nowhere to go. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. There was nowhere left to hide. Then the figure stepped into the alley, a tall man dressed in black, his face obscured by a mask. He moved toward me with slow, deliberate steps, his eyes glowing in the dark. The fear that gripped me now was like nothing I had ever felt before. This wasn't just a person. I could sense something darker behind him, something that didn't belong. I backed away, my body trembling, but the man didn't stop. He stepped closer, his voice now a low whisper. "Game over." In that moment, everything changed. My breath caught in my throat as the world seemed to close in. The walls of the alley felt like they were closing in on me, and I realized I had no way out. But just as he reached out to grab me, I heard something strange, an unexpected sound, a loud mechanical whir followed by a sharp click. The man froze, his expression faltering. I didn't understand what was happening, but it was my chance. I turned and ran, my legs carrying me faster than I thought possible. I heard the man behind me, but he didn't follow. The footsteps faded, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to hope. I didn't know if it was over, if I had truly escaped. But I knew one thing for certain. The game wasn't over, and I had just become part of something much, much darker than I could ever have imagined.